I'm sorry if it just glitched out for any of y'all. I had to string together 2 videos because I don't know why my computer's being a little weird today. Okay, but anyways, the next thing let's talk about is a change in demand. So what do we mean when we say that there is a change in demand? That means that we're going to be shifting this curve one way or the other. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. So let's go back to, here we go. Let's say that we wanted to, and let's actually get rid of a couple things real fast. I'm not very used to OneNote, so I kind of have to think about this real fast. You know what? You know what we're gonna do? We're gonna scroll down. Yeah, that works. Okay, so let's say that we have our original line, right? So we have, because we're gonna have kind of a cleaner version, we're going to have our prices along the top, price, and then we're gonna have quantity down here. Now, I'm not going to put in all the numbers or all the little dots because I want to see this as clean as possible. But let's say that we have that same demand curve that I showed you earlier. The relationship in between what people would be able to purchase or what their willingness to pay for different lattes were. If there's only one latte in the world, they might be able to pay a lot. If there are many lattes in the world, well, then you can't really charge much for each one. Let's call this demand 1, right? It just makes it a little bit easier. Okay, well, if I say that there's a change in demand, that means that we're changing the entire line. So if I'm saying there's an increase in demand, that means that every single price point, people would want more. So let's say that this is the idea that the particular type of coffee that I'm drinking trends on Twitter, and everybody's like, that is the coolest coffee I've ever seen in my entire life. I would die for it. It is wonderful, right? Okay, well, then that means when we had maybe that $8 coffee, that instead of one person wanting it, maybe instead the amount will be, or the quantity demanded will be closer to like 5. Maybe lots of people are demanding that $8 latte. Changes in demand can happen because something becomes popular, or maybe there's an income program where lots of people have more flexible cash that they can use to stimulate the economy. Maybe there's a preference thing where people are like, oh, wow, this is such a cool product. And that's something that they might be interested in. But we can also reduce demand too, right? So notice that going from demand 1 to demand 2, we shifted outwards. There was more that people wanted at every single price point. Is there? Here, let's just do this. All right, so let's say I get rid of these 2 lines. And I think about what would happen if we had a decrease in demand. So if we had a decrease in demand, that means that, oh, where'd my little, there it goes, that we want less at each price point. So let's say maybe a new study came out that said coffee can lead to insomnia. Like, we know that, but maybe it's a newer set of data to a lot of people. So let's go from demand 1 to demand 3. All right, so going from demand 1 to demand 3, as we shift that graph inwards, or that demand line inwards, that means that less people want it, or fewer people want it at each price point. That means when we're at this new demand where we have reduced demand, maybe no one's willing to pay for an $8 latte. But maybe if it's, $1, even though there's some health risk to it, maybe a couple people will still want that coffee. Right? So when we move outwards, we call this an increase in demand. That's very important, the difference between demand and quantity demand. This is an increase in demand. And if we shift it inwards, we call it a decrease in demand. Okay, I hope you're following along so far. I'll put links to it in case you all are interested, but I do have my entire introduction to principles of microeconomics class up on YouTube, which basically just has the what I typically do for freshmen, just all the classes that are associated with teaching this. So if you want more examples or you want more lessons, I can have them available to you, because I know we're going pretty quick. Now, there's lots of things that can influence if this demand goes left or right. So let's go back to this. Well, part of that is going to be related to the price of related goods. Actually, hold on, let me pause this for 1 second. All right, I brought examples back with me. Woo, let's do this. I had no jelly in my fridge, but let's assume that I like apple butter and peanut butter sandwiches. All right, that makes sense. Kind of like peanut butter and jelly, right? Let's just assume this jelly, peanut butter and jelly. Okay, well, the price of related goods are going to matter for how I buy peanut butter and jelly. Typically, these are complements. That means that they're things that we use together, right? So if I am a jelly producer and the price of peanut butter skyrockets, people are making less sandwiches, I'm probably going to have less jelly sales. There's going to be less demand for my product because of a price that's happening for a related good. This can also happen with substitutes. Let's say that I'm fine with either a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or if I do not have jelly, I would like a peanut butter and honey sandwich, right? So we have honey too, from the bees we have out back. Anyways, so peanut butter, honey. So if the price skyrockets for, well, no, let's say peanut butter and honey sandwiches are also acceptable. So we need to decide if we're going to use jelly or honey with our peanut butter. Okay. All right. Well, I'm a jelly manufacturer. I'd like for them to use jelly. That'd be pretty cool. But what about the price of the related good? I know my customers are okay with either a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or a peanut butter and honey sandwich. So if the price of honey goes up, well, then there's less people eating peanut butter and honey sandwiches and more people going to buy my jelly. That's great. That's a change in demand, but my price didn't change at all. How people were willing to purchase it changed. Likewise, let's say the price of honey falls. It's a great year for pollinators. There is honey everywhere, right? Super cheap. Well, if the price falls for honey, then maybe less people buy jelly because more people want to eat those peanut butter and honey sandwiches, right? What this boils down to is that there are many times where demand, how much people want at each price point for my good, does not really depend on the price of my good. It might depend or be influenced by the demand or the prices for products in similar or related markets, whether they be substitutes or complements. Then we also have expected future prices. How many times have y'all put off buying a phone because you know the next new phone is coming out? So if I wanted this S10 when the S20 came out, like I was like, I know the S20 is about to release. I'm gonna wait a little bit to buy an S10 because I know as soon as it releases, the S10 prices are going to go down. Expectations of future prices, that can affect how buyers purchase because they might expect that the price will go down in the future. Or if they think the price is going to go up in the future, for example, back to the Beanie Baby craze. Lots of people in the 1990s kept buying a ton of Beanie Babies because they expected them to be extremely valuable in the future. So since they expected the prices to rise so much, there was lots of demand for this good now. Instead of it just being like the normal demand for a stuffed teddy bear, there was a lot of demand for a stuffed teddy bear because they expected it to be valuable in the future. So this can affect demand, what people are willing to pay at every price point, whether it's the $3 Beanie Baby, the $5 Beanie Baby, the Beanie Baby that came with McDonald's bags, the $20 limited edition Princess Diana Beanie Baby. I'm sorry, I just watched a documentary on this. I promise I'm not a crazy Beanie Baby person, but that's something, right? Also, your income. So your income affects how much you're going to purchase of things. If I have the choice in between this peanut butter and jelly sandwich or going out for a steak dinner, well, if I've had a lot of raises and it's a very good year and my income has gone up, I'm probably less likely to eat the peanut butter jelly and more likely to eat the steak dinner, right? There might be a decrease in the demand for jelly, not because jelly changed their price at all, but because something else was happening. Like, income has gone up. I'm going to go switch to these better goods. Okay, then we also have expectations about future income and credit. If I'm a jelly producer and I'm selling and I'm wondering how people are demanding the products, well, if they think that they're about to get a huge raise, they might eat more peanut butter and jelly now, or they might go out and spend a whole bunch of money now because they're like, I'm going to get it back faster later. There's some ways that future income can affect my relationship with purchasing goods now. Same with population. If I'm producing jelly and we have 380 million instead of 330 million people in the United States, well, that's a lot more jelly that's going to be demanded, right? Regardless of what happens with price. Same with preferences. If peanut butter and jelly ends up becoming the hottest thing on Twitter or TikTok or Snapchat or whatever else social media there is out there, then that's going to be a preference that people see where they're going to want more of something. Notice that these 6 factors that change demand do not affect quantity demand. It's looking at how we shift the entire line to the left or right. Oops. So again, I have another example in case you want it in there. I have this nifty little chart, which I would honestly probably like write down at some point. But let's look at quantity demand, because that's the next piece of the puzzle that we have to think about. Yeah, this is sort of working. We're making this work. So what do I mean if there's a change in quantity demand? Well, change in quantity demand means the price relationship for one good. From here on out, I'm probably just going to put P up here and Q down here for price and quantity, just because it takes forever to just write that out over and over. But let's say that we have our demand line. And let's say we're interested in a change in quantity demand instead of a change in demand. Remember, change in demand moves the graph left to right. A change in quantity demand is related to a change in prices. Remember, quantity demand is how much people want at each price point. So if we go from having an $8 latte to those lattes are on sale for $4, we see that this price reduction happened. What happens to quantity? You know, we have a question mark right here. Well, the quantity demanded at $8 might be 2 lattes. We might sell 2 lattes. While the quantity demanded at $4 lattes, well, more people might have come into the store and they're like, "Ooh, this is a good price." Society might have a higher quantity demand at that price point. Quantity demand is just moving along this line. Boom. So we see that we have this increase in quantity. So if we say that we increase the quantity demand, that means that the price has gone down and the quantity that is demanded at that new price point is greater, right? We've gone from 2 to 5. If I say that quantity demand has reduced, it's just the other direction, right? So we have our demand line, and let's say we go from that $4 latte to the $8 latte. We raise the prices. Well, then there might be a reduction in the quantity demanded at that new price point. So if I say that there's a change in quantity demand, I'm talking about moving along the line. If I say that there's a change in demand, it's a change of where the line is. All right. For everything we just did on demand, there is also supply. So demand is how much people want of a good or service. Supply is who's supplying them, right? Especially because they're taking managerial economics, this is actually the very important part of the equation to us. We really want to know how much I can produce at each price point and how those different price points affects my ability to buy or sell, right? So if a firm supplies a good or service, then there's a couple things that we need to think about. What does that supply actually mean? Remember, for demand, it was that I want it, I have the money for it, and I have a plan to buy it. For supply, it means that you have to have the resources and technology to produce a good. You can say that you're going to supply tennis shoes all day, but if your machines make sweaters, then you do not have the resources and technology to produce shoes, right? You can profit from producing it. Okay, if I'm producing shoes and there are people willing to pay for it, I could profit from that venture. Okay, then I might supply it. And then you have to have a definitive plan to produce it. So to be considered supply, you have to be able to make it, you have to be able to profit from it, and you have to have a plan to do it, right? Resources and technology kind of determine what's possible to produce. I would like to say all day long that I can produce rocket ships. I cannot. There is not the technology out there for me to make a rocket ship in my backyard. Does not exist, right? So resources and technology can determine what's possible. And then we also have the idea of quantity supplied, much like we did supply. Quantity supplied is how much you would be willing to sell at each price point. So let's look at what that looks like. So demand, notice that we have this downward sloping demand line. I like to think downward demand, kind of the alliteration sort of helps me remember that. Supply is going to be upward sloping. So let's look at what that looks like. Again, we're going to have our graphs. Whee! All right. So we have our price. We have our quantity. Now, let's put on the thinking caps of someone who has to sell something. All right, let's say that we're the people selling those lattes, right? Okay, well, if it's an $8 latte and people are willing to pay me $8 for each latte, I'm probably going to sell a lot of lattes that day, right? Or I would like to. I would be willing to like not make pastries that day and instead make extra lattes. If I'm getting $8 a latte, I'm probably not making tea that day. I'm probably producing lattes, right? So we might want to supply a lot of lattes at $8. Let's say like we'd like to produce, I don't know, 5. And then maybe at $6, we're like, well, everybody has oat milk and almond milk, and that's a little bit more expensive. And then we have to think about the syrups, and the syrup costs are kind of expensive. Maybe like we're not willing to produce as much. Maybe we'll produce like 4 now. Maybe we'll produce 4 at $6. We think that's still good. And then maybe at $4, you're like, ooh, we're kind of getting into an area like gray area. I don't know how much I want to produce. Like I'm going to make a couple lattes at $4. I'm not going to be happy about it. Let's call this 3. Like, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I'm not going to go above and beyond to make 2 extra lattes at $4. Maybe $2. Well, maybe at $2, that's hit my cost, right? Because you have to purchase the cup, you have to purchase the milk, you have to purchase the flavorings, you have to purchase the coffee. Like maybe $2, that's your stop point of like, I can't really produce less than that. Okay, well then this line, this relationship right here, notice that we have this upward sloping line. The more people are willing to pay you, the more you'll be able, or you're willing to produce. We call this the supply line, right? Upward sloping. Notice that it doesn't really end at like 0, and that's because there's not really a 0. What we have is the minimal cost to be able to start a good or service. So this is like the min price. This is for your very first latte, the minimum amount to be able to produce that of like what the cost would be. And then we see it's upward sloping from there. As people are willing to pay you more of them, you're probably willing to produce more of them. Now, notice that we also in these have these little pieces right here. We have these individual price points. These are called quantity supplied. These are the amount that's demanded at each price, or amount that's supplied at each price point. Oh, I am tongue-tied today. So like at $6, if I am willing to produce 4 lattes, then my quantity supplied at $6 is 4. It's how much I'm willing to produce at that price point. All right. Oh, we're just trucking along. We're getting through this today. Okie dokie. So we have supply, we have our quantity supplied, we have the law of supply, which is very similar to the law of demand, but backwards, right? It's like understanding why we're going upward sloping instead of downward sloping. What the law of supply says is that other things remaining the same. We're not changing anything. We're not changing substitutes, complements, how many people are in the register. If we change nothing, the higher the price of the good, the higher people are willing to pay me for it, the greater the quantity supplied. The more I will be willing to produce, the higher and higher the price people are paying me is. Right? And the law of supply kind of results from the general tendency of marginal cost. Like sometimes it's more expensive to make that 10th latte than that 9th latte, right? Like sometimes like, oh, that means my front of house person's a little overwhelmed. I'm gonna have to hire another worker. I'm gonna have to buy another bottle of syrup. I'm gonna have to get another thing of cups. Costs go up over time, right? So, or over the amount that you supply. So the more and more I supply of a good, the more they're going to have to pay me for that next one, because I'm having to purchase more supplies. I'm having to get more people working. I'm having to get workers from further and further away. It's hard enough to get workers. Maybe I have to incentivize them with more money, right? So the law of supply says that essentially costs go up over time. So that you got to pay me at least as much to meet that cost, which is moving upwards. All right. So I'll give you another one right here that kind of just shows you with the supply of energy bars if you want to happen to look at it. Then we talk about the minimum supply price. Remember that was the $2 that I showed you, which is like the minimum amount that you need to be paid to produce that first thing. The lowest possible price that you can get for everything, the absolute minimum you could take for something is called the minimum supply price or the marginal cost. They're kind of the same thing. What it means is how much it costs me to produce one more of something. You need to be paid at least that to even consider making it, right? And this is what the supply graph shows. At point A, I see that it's going to cost me 50 cents in supply to make the first one. Like that is the minimum amount that I would accept before I can start producing. At E, we see that for 15 million of these candy bars, I need to make $2.50 because maybe that's what my supplies are. That is my marginal cost for making that 15 millionth candy bar. Is it cost me $2.50 in supplies? I need to make that much. And that's what the supply curve represents. So there's many ways to change supplies, much like we change demand, right? So let's kind of talk through what that necessarily means. And I'm sorry this is taking forever, but I promise this terminology is going to be helpful as we continue through this course. So let's go back. And by now you're becoming an expert at drawing these graphs if you're drawing them along. So we got our quantity, we got our price, and we have our upward sloping supply curve. Now, supply can move outwards or it can move inwards for a whole variety of things. So let's call this supply 1. Okay, well, let's say that we're producing lattes. It was a great year for milk. Normal milk, alternative milks, everything in between. great year. It's so cheap to purchase milk right now. Okay, well, if one of my inputs are way cheaper, then maybe I can start producing at a lower price, right? Maybe we might see some sort of shift outwards. Let's call it supply two, where at each price point, I can actually produce more of something. So maybe for an $8 latte, instead of the sorry, I don't know why my thing's being weird. Maybe instead of the 5 that I could have produced, I can now produce 8 of them. Because I'm like, wonderful. Well, now it's cheaper for me to be able to produce that. This increase in supply is a shift outwards. Okay, now let's think about a decrease in supply. This can happen for a whole bunch of reasons too. Let's say that, price of, let's say that like maybe I sell both coffee and tea, and like tea's trending. People are paying me so much money for tea. Like instead of the lattes, they're wanting tea all day. And you know what? It's cheaper for me to produce tea. And it's great that like I can make tea very cost effective. So maybe I'm going to put one or more of my resources into supplying the tea. Well, if I'm supplying tea, that means I am not supplying as much coffee. So we might see that we have something kind of like this, where we have a decrease in supply. Maybe now we produce, for that same $8, maybe we might produce only 3 lattes, or want to produce only 3 lattes. So we're going to supply 3. So we have changes in supply. That means moving the entire line, right? We also have changes in quantity supply. So remember, quantity supply is how much you're willing to produce at each price point. The difference in between it, so we see that we have giant shifts in supply for, changes in supply. If we're talking about changes in quantity supplied, that's just moving in between these different points. So let's say that we have our, I don't know, $6 latte and our $8 latte. Well, if the price goes up, I will increase the quantity supplied. I will have to supply more at that higher price point. This is an increase in quantity supplied is when we go up the curve. Okay, well, let's think about what happens when price goes down. Let's say that there's a reduction in price. Lattes, people, instead of paying $8, are now paying $6 for them. Well, then I might see a reduction in my quantity supplied. The amount that I would be willing to produce at that price point goes down. All right, so you're becoming experts very, very quickly. You're getting the first couple weeks of a micro of economics course so quickly, and you're handling it, and I'm proud of you. I also have additional videos for you if you're interested in going deeper into this, but you don't have to. So there's 6 different factors that change supply, much like I have the 6 different factors who change demand. Let's go through this. The price of factors of production. So if it costs me milk, syrup, coffee to be able to make a latte, then if the cost of milk goes up, I'm not going to be able to supply as much for each price point for what people would pay for a latte. If the price of milk goes down at each price point for a latte, I can produce more lattes. We also have the price of related goods. So if the price of pastries have skyrocketed and people are paying me a ton for them, I might be like, well, do you need a coffee with it too? Maybe I'm willing to produce more because you want coffee and pastries together. Ooh, wonderful, wonderful. I'm willing to produce more coffee so that you will buy more of those expensive pastries. Maybe it's that tea sales are through the roof and they're paying a ton. Might produce less coffee because I'm going to focus on tea. There might also be expected future prices that we need to think about. So if I think that the price of milk is going to go up, I'm going to want to sell a lot of lattes now while the price of milk is still lower. We need to think about the number of suppliers. So the more people competing with me, the harder it's going to be for me to be able to capitalize on my market. So that might shift my supply. If I know at $8, a ton of other places have opened up that are selling coffee for $8, I might sell less coffee, right? Because I now have a bunch of people that I'm competing against for that market. We also need to think about technology. If we have a new coffee espresso machine come in that you press one button and a latte is made, well, that's a lot cheaper and a lot faster. So that might be an improvement that makes us willing to supply more. There's also just the idea of states of nature. This is when something happens to the stuff that you use to produce something. I like to think about pizzas. And if I'm selling pizzas, but it's a terrible tomato season, a hurricane came in and destroyed every tomato, well, that's a state of nature thing that's going to start affecting things. It's going to make it difficult to supply because I'm not going to be able to get my tomato sauce. I'm not going to be able to do other things. People aren't going out to buy pizza. States of nature is just like the big uncontrollable events. All right. So this one's just another example, advances in technology that might move your supply curve outwards because now it's cheaper to produce more at every single price point. Woo! Okay. And then much like what I gave you for demand, we have a similar little graph right here, the nice little cheat sheet that I like to give you of remembering the difference in between changes in supply and changes in quantity supplied. All right, finally, let's put those two graphs together in what we call the market equilibrium. So equilibrium is just when supply and demand intersect. So we're going to have an equilibrium price and we're going to have an equilibrium quantity. This means if nothing influenced the market and exactly everything stays the same, at what price and quantity will the amount that people want to sell equal the amount that people want to buy? So what does that look like graphically? Well, I can show you what that looks like graphically because don't worry, I am very good at making graphs. I do this all day, every day. So let's think about this market equilibrium. All right, well, then when we're looking at our graphs, we have our price, we have our quantity, we have our downward sloping demand curve, we have our upward sloping supply curve. Notice that they cross in the middle. Okay, well, at this point, let's draw a line over to where that is on price. We're going to call this, I'm just going to say P star, this is our equilibrium price. This is if we had exactly the amount of people wanting to sell for the amount and volume that they want to sell equal to the amount that people are demanding and they want to purchase. This is where the market would clear. Everything gets sold, everything gets bought. We call this one, I'm going to call this Q star, the equilibrium quantity. Equilibrium quantity. This is just where the amount of what's being bought is sold in. So for coffees, let's go back to the coffees. Maybe it might be that we end up selling 4 coffees for $6. Maybe that's where our intersection is. That is where the market likes to be happy and we will operate until something else happens. But maybe supply might shift. Maybe demand might shift. Maybe there's some sort of other factor that happens to it, right? So for example, if we have a shift in supply, maybe milk prices are cheaper and we go to supply 2. Notice that equilibrium shifts. If it's now way cheaper to produce lattes, well, our Q star might change. Maybe instead we'll produce 6 lattes. And so we increase the quantity. And let's look at what happens to price. Well, if we take it over to price, well, now that we can produce a lot of lattes for cheaper, and now we're producing 6 lattes, maybe they pay us $4 for it. And that's our new price equilibrium, the six coffees for $4 instead of 4 coffees for $6. So supply and demand can shift either way. Those are the important things to remember. All right, let's go to this next piece. I give you an example right here of like where it would be for the candy bars if you're following along only with the notes. All right, so it kind of tells you like where there's no shortage or surplus of bars. At that equilibrium point, that means that there's no extra people at the market who were unable to sell their goods or services, and there's not people in the market who were unable to buy goods or services. Woo! Okay, number 2 out of the way. I will see you at the 3rd video.